Mind and Markets, top lessons from Trading Psychology series that we run here at Alphachain Capital. This is Ron William, your performance coach and mentor. I'm excited about this grand finale session, which wraps up everything that we've covered. It is so difficult to share, let me say that again, it is so difficult to share key insights from hours of research and live case study work and coaching experiences with other traders, including yourselves, all in one session. So what I will do is share top of mind best insights, but do know that there will be a lot of things that you will still need to relearn in a deep dive, more comprehensive way, session by session. So this is just a summary wrap to trigger your mind, to maybe get you thinking, oh yeah, I need to be doing more work in that area. Think of this as a flyby review of things that will add value to you or things that you need to do more of. Okay, so I'm gonna get back to the slide pack and begin. Good news is that the work has partly been done for you through the wealth of educational resources. So there's a range of videos, as an example, that review each of the subjects that we're going to cover today. There are 5 parts. And if you want to watch those videos, I can make them available on Slack after the session. Just ping me and let me know what you're most interested in. And then most importantly, when I share the links, let me know that you've watched it and follow up with key insights that you have. Also know that a lot of the original work is based on an exclusive interview with leading trade psychologist, Dr. Van Tharp, who really is one of the early pioneers in his field. So if you want the PDF interview read, I can also make that available. Now, the main areas that we're going to focus on, building on the multi-series of trading psychology that we cover as a regular schedule for the Alphachain work, is listed as follows. Nature or nurture? Are successful traders born, or can they be trained? I'll give you the short answer to that with some follow-up thoughts to work on. Then how important is trade psychology? Self-explanatory, but we'll actually probe that a little bit more and not just talk about psychology, but some of the neuroscience work and what that suggests about change and how we can and should bring about meaningful change. Then midsection, overcoming your trade mistakes. What are the worst mistakes according to my research? And ultimately, the challenges that we face when we make those mistakes and ways to overcome them. And then we round off with strategy, trade assessment. I'm just going to focus more on event risk in that segment. We cover much more in the standalone session, but I will be focused in what I share today. And then right at the end, peak performance. Again, so much that we share in that segment too, but I'm just going to highlight some of my favorite pieces, which I know are of interest to many of you too. Okay, so nature or nurture, the age-old question about life and, yes, markets. So way back when, just to give you the preamble story, this question was asked and answered by 2 successful and wealthy investors, William Eckhart and Richard Dennis, and it made the classic story of the turtle experiment. I won't go into that story, many of you already know it, but at the end of it, this gentleman's bet where they put their money where their mouth was, led to them believing that you can successfully train people without financial market experience, or even those with, how to be successful in teaching them how to follow a successful strategy. Now, the reality is there's more to learn. And my first insight for nature nurture is this three-step process, which is the roadmap to transformation blueprint that I've been developing and sharing with you for some time. The levels are awareness, change, transformation, but essentially step one first, and it's an awareness of your nature, nurture, signature. Nature, survival instincts, and your temperament. Temperament is both nature and nurture, but I put it on the left side for now. And on the nurture side, your beliefs and values and how they are shaped based on anything. And in this example, specific to trading, risk, and money. So if we gain more awareness on each of these areas, nature, nurture, we can then learn, firstly, what level we're at, and then thereafter, how we can bring about meaningful change. Remember, transformation is viable and sustainable change. And the key insight here is follow this roadmap. Now, the nature part of the equation is all to do with survival instincts. And the key lesson there is that your biological conditioning is not your destiny. So the stress reactions that take place when we're in that fight or flight response are part of our biological programming. But although we can't change that, we can manage and optimize it. So do know that there is some way to actually progress. Second point is that on the personality side, your personality is your personal reality in life and in trading. Personality traits influence trader behavior in terms of your outlook on life and markets, decision-making, and risk tolerance. We tend to build a maturity of our temperament in a more established form during our late adulthood, late 20 year range. And that's shared by a blend of nature and nurture attributes. Remember that the traits that you are born with and develop over time, all they are is a reference point for self-awareness that can be used to help develop progressive behavioral change. Okay, so you do need to start somewhere, but ultimately it's a foundation step for you to build on. And the third point here is nurture. So we're shifting from one side to the other. On the nurture side, going back to that point that it's all about beliefs and values, your software program is reprogrammable. And if you are successful, that software program can change the hardware. We'll talk more about that in neuroscience to follow up in the next section. But for now, when it comes to nurture, we need to understand more about something called a belief paradigm hierarchy. And that shows you each of these different levels: external, behavioral, capability, value, and identity, and spiritual. As we go through this process, we get to unpack more subconscious thoughts, mental blocks, and maybe self-limiting beliefs that we have. And in doing so, we can start to reframe them. There's an exercise that allows you to do that. Ask me about it if you're interested. It's called Belief Paradigm Exercise, and it's something that we do in session one, and as part of the coaching work one-to-one. Next section, how important is your trade psychology? Simple answer, it's everything. But if I was to quantify it for you, it would be an 80-20 rule. 80% in favor of trading psychology, 20% for the remaining mechanics. What we think is the be-all end-all is actually the tip of the iceberg, and that is your logical reasons for being successful. But everything else is more the subconscious mind, beliefs and values that are shaped around the same points of trading, risk, and money. So always remember, psychology is the lion's share of the success equation to trading. And ultimately, what does that mean? It means greater self-awareness of how you are driven and how you can improve that mindset. Second point, in terms of more tangible and practical benefits to a successful market in mind approach, remember these points. Performance enhancement, i.e. bottom line, making more money. Risk optimization, which is a great way of creating a better performance equity curve by minimizing the drawdowns and optimizing the risk tolerance. And then also the biases, let's remember. And 3, systematic process, a rule and evidence-based process that you can follow in a disciplined way. All of these key factors are really some of the strongest reasons to do this work. Third point, and final to this section, is on the neuroscience side. Remember that we're not just talking about psychology, we're talking about the brain and how your brain is a muscle, use it or lose it, otherwise known as neuroplasticity. This is how not only can you shape the thoughts that you think, but by doing so, you can physiologically reshape your brain and actually grow certain parts of the brain that can be advantageous to you, give you more mental agility, resilience, and just offer more of an adaptive mind. The buzzword here is neuroplasticity. Remember that. If it's the first time you've heard of it, I recommend that you do some research on it. It's all good news for change work in general and in trading. Okay, section 3, overcoming your trading mistakes. This is the one that most people enjoy here at Alphachain. And the main reason is because it really kind of talks about what we all experience. And it does a deep dive on behavioral biases, which I think most people want to learn. They want to learn the theory, but more importantly, they want to know how to address them. So the number one bias that everyone is affected by is the fear of losing money. I'll say it again. The number one bias that every trader is affected by is the fear of losing money. Why? Because it triggers your emotional alarm system. I'll just quickly do a visual explanation of that. In the middle of your brain, you have the emotional alarm system, otherwise known as the amygdala or the lizard brain. That gets triggered under immense stress, what we refer to as chronic stress. And the front part of your head, the prefrontal cortex, PFC, is the logical part of the brain that basically goes into semi-paralysis mode when you are under chronic stress. I've said this before when we talk about nature, nurture, and survival reactions. Now, the reason why it matters now, as I talked to you about one of the top behavioral biases in the world, fear of losing money, is because there's an unequal relationship between the pain of loss and the pleasure of an equal gain to a factor of 2. So the pain of loss is twice as great as the pleasure of an equal gain. That is down to how we are programmed as human beings, and it will naturally have a big impact as traders, simply because this is how we function in order to stay alive and to evolve as a human species. As a trader, it means we are more risk averse. And unfortunately, what that also leads to is instead of maximizing gains and minimizing losses, we do the inverse. We also under or overtrade, and ultimately at some point in time, we suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out, which is a hybrid of fear and greed, but with a twist. So if you were to trade, let's say £1,000, and you lost 1,000 but gained 1,000, you would still be thinking twice as more as 1,000 that you lost rather than the 1,000 that you won. Just in terms of the impact of that. What that means is we have to be aware of our general disposition, but then to be more risk averse. But B, we need to also balance out as much as possible and have some kind of a best practice to help at either extreme, loss or gain, so that we are able to stay focused and not downward spiral. 2, behavioral biases. There are many. I just mentioned loss aversion or fear, and then greed, which is part of the overconfidence mix. I also mentioned FOMO, all on the right side on your screen. But essentially, if you just want to categorize all the different behavioral biases out there, just think of emotional biases and cognitive biases. That's all you have to remember. Emotional, cognitive. If you just do that, you will do more than the average trader that remembers a long list of biases, but there's no way of having a smart grouping or understanding of what each of those biases mean. You need context. It's like looking at technical analysis signals. If I was to ask you how many technical analysis signals do you know, there are hundreds, and we just know a fraction of them and use an even lesser quantity. Imagine the amount of behavioral biases that exist. Same thing, same issue. So what I recommend is that you remember the macro categorizations of these biases, because they will help for smart thinking and awareness, but also they will help you understand how to deal with each one based upon how they relate to each other. So keep that as an important point. Cognitive, emotional. Cognitive is matters of the mind, where we take mental shortcuts. Emotional are literally the shifts between fear and greed, and the ones that tend to be a little bit more impactful and harder to deal with. In our third session on overcoming trade mistakes, we cover each of these and we include strategies for addressing them. Now, one of the top strategies that really works for all biases, psychological, emotional, and the ones that I just mentioned on the screen before, is mistake analysis. So the best thing you can do is to actually take accountability, responsibility for any trade mistake. Best way to do that is to list it down, write down what the mistake was: emotional entry, tight stop, not following a trading plan, add your reason: poor mindset, loss aversion, lack of discipline, count the number of times that it's happened, 5, 3, 2, and then add a monetary, i.e. money value, to that trading mistake, so that you've got a quantifiable metric for how much it's costing you. And a lot of you talk about how do we enhance performance. One way to do that is to reduce the amount of money you lose every time you make a mistake. And the best approach to achieve that is literally to start accounting for it as you would your own money in your own bank account. And as you do that, using an arbitrary unit of value, which is the R value that you see on the screen, you can net it off and then ultimately work to reduce that trading error. Now, just as a quick point, the work of Dr. Van Tharp and the leading institute that he has run for over 4 decades, with those top super traders, he will encourage them to have a 95% or more risk mistake-free trading track, which means they only produce mistakes, 2, 3, 5% of the time, which is minimal. Most people I speak to experience the opposite situation, where 90+% of the time they're making mistakes, and only 5-10% of the time are they mistake free. So just think about that. If we could just dial that down by a few percentage points, you will see direct impact on your performance, and at the very least, a more optimized risk um, management. Okay, next session, section 4, and I'm kind of speeding through, but I'm doing so that we can just have a little more time to reflect and maybe ask questions. Strategy and trade assessment. So this is where I encourage you all to review your trades and not just look at the performance or the drawdown rate in terms of, when your equity curve has taken a hit, but also look at the biases that you've experienced. Look at the best and worst trades. Ask yourself what happened in each of those scenarios, lessons learned, and then be more aware about your mindset at that time. Score yourself 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, or actually qualify what was going on in your mind when you made that trade. Now, it's difficult to do that for every single trade, but if you can do that for if best and worst trades, or just do it on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be daily, it could just be weekly. Once a week, what was the top, best or worst trade that you had a trade psychology experience? Note it down in a diary and start plotting these scores and psychological experiences on paper so you can start to track them. Just like you're looking for patterns in the market, you need to be looking for patterns in yourself. And by doing so, you're gaining awareness and you'll have better insight as to how you can improve what you do. Thumbs up if you guys are okay with what I'm sharing so far. It's clear, hopefully useful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat. I'm kind of speeding up the pace, but I'm doing it because this is a flyby review, just so you can spark some ideas of material that I cover every term in a 5-part trade psychology series. That is the purpose of this session today. Okay, so as you go through the process of best, worst, and just general performance of your portfolio, always think about event risk. Now, when I say that, I don't mean think worst case scenario and prepare for the end of the world, especially this year where it truly has been crazy so far. What I'm saying to you is prepare for known unknowns and unknown unknowns. There's no simple way of doing it other than don't assume that you know everything that's happening in the market. Always make sure you're hedged in some way. And remember that markets are predicated on volatility, and often it's big volatility, not small. So the whole purpose of this diagram here is to alert you to that fact, and the fact that you can have not just black swans, but white swan events where big moves can happen in the market. They lead to what is termed a VUCA paradigm, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Now, this isn't just a snazzy term that I'm throwing at you. Remember the session we did on seeking alpha in a VUCA world and the importance of thinking outside the box, being more strategic, lateral minded, even if you're doing day-to-day trades or your intraday or your intraday trading, or you're looking at swing trades, whatever your strategy, during turbulent times where volatility is elevated, where just this year we've had inflation hit 40-year highs, geopolitical risk vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, we're having all kinds of legacy issues from the pandemic, certainly in Asia right now, if you look out into China, near where I was living in Hong Kong. The world is fast changing and it is very VUCA right now. And even day-to-day headlines are also flip-flopping all the time. So in that type of environment, it's really important to be in the zone, to have a reasonably independent mindset and not be too prone to bias, not just biases, but confirmation bias, herding, all the things where we're just overly consumed by the noise around us. And we find it very difficult to have a clarity of mind. as you learn about VUCA, you will also start to be a little bit more uncomfortable with it, be a little bit more comfortable with it. Most people lose out during VUCA times because they just get blindsided. It just becomes too much too soon. And instead of learning more about the disruption and how to actually manage the risk in that time, but also maybe seize an opportunity, they just get overwhelmed. So I would encourage you to embrace VUCA, understand VUCA, and accept VUCA, because the more you do that, the more you'll be able to navigate during these types of environments. Now I'm just speaking high level here, but just want to get a thumbs up that everyone's okay about this part, what I'm sharing. Just give me a thumbs up. I'm not just throwing a snazzy term at you. I'm just trying to wake us all up to the reality of what happens when things change and they feel like an upside down world, and how it's really important to condition ourselves to be able to deal with that on a psychological, but also on the strategy side as well. Thank you for the thumbs up. Okay, now one strategy, practical strategy in doing that is scenario planning. Too many times I've seen traders and investors try to predict their way out of a crazy environment, My encouragement is to not do that. Now, for 20 plus years, I have been a successful predictor of trends, and I got paid to do that as a full-time job. That's also what I do as a trader. And I coach many people who do the same. Now, I'm not telling you it's wrong or right. I'm just saying it is less reliable to predict anything during uncertain times. So in that type of VUCA environment, it's really important that you are not just fixated on prediction and more instead open-minded to multiple scenarios. Now, when I say multiple scenarios, remember, the simplest scenario that we all do as traders is, guess what? Risk reward. Thumbs up. Everyone remember that one? No one wakes up in the morning and says, hey, look at the risk side of that market and completely ignore the reward side. I hope you don't do that. Or vice versa. Look at the reward, but don't look at the risk. As traders, by definition, we are defaulted to the risk reward equation. Now, that is a bull case and a bear case scenario. Immediately, we have market going up or the market going down. We're hedged on either side with a risk reward ratio. Now, a scenario plan is more advanced than that. What we're looking at is multiple scenarios, not just two. And we're not just looking at a binary outcome of risk reward. We're actually looking at uncertain risk reward. So what is the base case, the core case to my trade? What is the best case? What is the risk case? Always think in that way. And whenever you've got a kind of a clear cut view on a market, flip it around. Ask yourself devil's advocate questions. What would it take for my view to be wrong? If this chart is very bullish, how about I turn it upside down and see how that changes my perspective on things? What scenarios have I not thought about? Could I prepare for? Constantly ask yourself these questions. Now, the point about asking yourself these questions, just as a side point, is not to bring about self-doubt or to flip-flop your views. The point about this is to expand your mind and to better manage risk, volatility, and ultimately the whole VUCA equation by getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and with adapting to change and everything that it brings about. Okay, so scenario planning is a very good way to do that. I did a more in-depth session on it as part of Seeking Alpha in a VUCA World, and I'm currently teaching a course on scenario planning separate from this work with the Van Tharp Institute. And so it's become a real area of specialization that I recommend to all of you. You can do it as short-term traders. You can also do it as long-term investors. It applies to all. Essentially, it's a way of developing mental strategies so that you can perform well during VUCA times. Okay, and then a final word on peak performance, which we completed as part of the series. Peak performance is not about your trading strategy. It's about your mind, body, and emotional strategy, the holistic balance of yourself. And that goes back to let me just start from where we ended. It takes you all the way back to our flow chart, remember, which is all about the roadmap to transformation, but ultimately peak performance. That's through awareness, change, and transformation, awareness of our nature, nurture. But ultimately, it's a peak performance state, so we can trade in the zone, be in flow, and be able to adapt to changing market environments. Now, one key way of doing that is by having a growth mindset. And so one of the opening slides I share as a key insight to peak performance is definitely having a growth mindset over a fixed one. Fixed mind, often we ebb and flow between the two, but just to be clear, a fixed mindset doesn't mean that you're not breaking to new highs and experiencing positive times. What it means is that when you're having a difficult time, you often make the same mistake more than once. And in doing so, that takes you into a negative spiral, and which ultimately is a downtrend in performance. Whereas a virtuous cycle driven by a growth mindset still has highs and lows, but the difference is you learn from your experiences in that roller coaster ride. And in doing so, you are able to turn a low into a high. In doing so, you're able to turn a low into a high. And one of the ways that you do that is by incorporating those key lessons into a new and improved strategy, market and mind. And so that gives you new high breakouts, that gives you a viable, sustainable uptrend. And you also start to develop more adaptive and resilient thinking, which is extremely good for successful trading. Now, a key underpinning of a growth mindset is being able to fail forward. And this is lessons from the top. In the sports world, Michael Jordan, world's #1 basketball player, who famously said, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career, lost almost 300 games, 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Key point, Michael Jordan is not telling you that it's cool to fail. Does anyone think that's what he's saying? Quick survey check. I'm just gonna. So I got it's cool quote, but what do you think is the meaning of that quote? I'm gonna slow down a little bit just to share some insights. Cool to fail. The more times we fail, the more times we learn, or something else. What do you think is the meaning behind that statement? Now, remember what I was talking about was failing forward. So here we have like one feedback point. We're human. We make mistakes all the time. Absolutely. And Jaden, I think, is hitting the nail on the head there when he says, each failure is a lesson. There is a well-known trade psychologist that speaks about the drawdown effect being a big bounce back opportunity, the drawdown, portfolio drawdown being a big bounce back opportunity, both in terms of the portfolio performance, but also in terms of your learning as a trader. So keep in mind, not failure, but failing forward. Each time you make a mistake, you suffer from a bias or self-limiting belief, why is that experience happening? What can you learn from it? And what action steps can you take? The more you do that, you actually progress from each of those experiences, the more you can actually definitely build resilience, but also improve your strategy. And so that's ultimately what Michael Jordan did. If you want to watch his documentary movie, The Last Dance, still available on Netflix, you can get a real deep dive review of his story, but you'll also better understand this quote that he's known for, because this is how he lived his life. This is how he trained. He never let anything phase him out, didn't give up, which most traders do, unfortunately. And each time he hit the wall, and maybe tough competition, maybe just a bad losing streak, he would double down and work harder, smarter, and try and develop a new edge. So as traders, that's truly what we all need to do all the time, because markets are always changing and we always need to be better and more unique in the way that we maintain ourselves. Best way to stay on track, my final points, everyone, is to make sure you've done a goal map. Remember, we miss 100% of the shots we don't take. But even if we take some of those shots, if we don't have the best resources for doing so, we can also hit and miss. So that's why it's important to use effective tools like this goal map, which is a brain-friendly technique. It applies left brain and right brain thinking, creative and logic, so that we can just have more of a effective follow-up to the process and ultimately achievement of it. And so this is a last week exercise I asked you all to do, and we had a great presentation from many of the traders here at Alphachain. Essentially, think about why you want to trade, and think big, think deep and meaningful thoughts. What are the sub goals? Maybe it's assets, passive income, which supplement financial independence, life balance, or let's say quality time with family and friends. How, in terms of education, in terms of mentoring, in terms of maybe just skill sets you want to acquire. Who, different professional groups that you can work with, and then most importantly, a timeline. 3 years as a sweet spot. I always say macro and micro. Macro 3 to 5 years, short term 1 to 3 years, or of course you can break down the 1 year into quarterly and monthly. The point is both the macro and the micro goals work together, and I would aim for at least 3 years to make sure you have a strategic enough plan of action for your trading. Many of you will say 3 years is too long. That time is going to fly by anyway. The average number of hours to master any discipline is about 10,000 hours, and that is roughly the amount of time it takes to complete a university degree. Same for any new discipline, and certainly for trading. And of course, you can break that down into bite-sized pieces. The key thing is begin with the end in mind, and know that there is work to be done, and that your day and every hour of that day counts for something, particularly if you have that big picture in mind. So do your goal map and follow your goal map, develop more than one, and make sure it's top of mind, maybe in front of your face on an active basis, so that you don't forget it, and so that you're always asking yourself what more you can do to stay on track. Okay, so that's it from me in the flyby review. Just to remind of what we've covered, I'm going to highlight the key points. Nature or nurture. Are successful traders born with skill, or can they be trained? The answer is both are important, but nurture is ultimately what matters most. How important is trade psychology? It is everything, but if you wanted to quantify it, it's 80-20. The 20% still matters in terms of the mechanics of trading, risk and money management, but the lion's share is very much psychology, and that's all about your subconscious mind, and also how the brain functions in terms of neuroplasticity and how we can reshape what we think, and how we and our mental disposition in terms of agility and resilience. Overcoming your trade mistakes. Remember, there are many, but the number one is loss aversion. Why? Because we have a fear we have a survival fear, which is for staying alive and for evolving. We're not limited by it. It has its purpose, but we need to make sure we're managing and optimizing it. Also think about the other behavioral biases that we experience on a regular basis. And ultimately, whichever one it is, loss aversion, overconfidence, or other, we need to be doing mistake analysis so that we can reduce the amount of times we make error. Remember that 95% mistake-free goal that most super traders aim for with the Van Tharp Institute. We tend to do the opposite. Let's try to just work on marginal gains where we can reduce our mistakes by a few percentage points. And the best way to do that is to quantify them in money terms, but also diarize the experience as well, so we can get a better understanding. Strategy and trade assessment. My main focus there was event risk. Look at your best and worst trades, but then also put it in the context of event risk so that you are prepared for uncertain times. I spoke to you about VUCA and the relevance of that now more than any other time, but also just in general, so that you don't get too comfortable in any market regime and you learn how to adapt to different environments. And then lastly, peak performance, which I just ended on just now. It goes back to that roadmap to transformation with the 3 steps of awareness, change, and transformation, and a better understanding of our nature-nurture signature. But in order to do that, we still need to have a growth mindset. It is critical for us to work on ourselves more and develop that mind, body, emotion ecology. And there are going to be different best practices to achieve that. Work on what works best for you. Now, I've just got a question here in the chat. Slides are not shared. They were previously integrated in the course for Alphachain, so you can recheck your course material. But do know the video will be available afterwards, and a lot of the practical tools which are shared are the main things that you need, which I do make sure everyone has. So each of the sections that I covered today do have an exercise assessment. So if you want to get the most value from this work, everything I just shared with you, attend all the sessions that I will do next week onwards, because we're just going to go through the same cycle again of each of the subjects I mentioned to you today, but also complete the exercises, because that will give you the deeper knowledge that will make more of a difference. So I'm going to wrap up in the next few minutes. And what I will do is just a quick key insight and pulse check with each of you, just to see how we can better add value. So Jaden, any key insights or questions that you have on all that we covered?
No, I understood most of it. I'll be honest, most of the things that you said are things that my grandmother tells me every single day. The fail forward thing was a big one. She says that all the time. So I've got this whole spiel all the time. So no questions for me, honestly. That's things that I gotta work on myself. I always get down on myself when I fail. I'm a perfectionist in a bad way. So that's always been something I have to overcome. And that's something that, this morning I made like 12 trades and, failed a few of them, but, I just keep going and, just pumping out as many as I can and learning from each one. And, I had more success rate today than I had all last week. So, that's good. Fail forward, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, easier said than done. And that is the reality with a lot of the work that we have to do, especially with the concept of failing forward. There is a book called Failing Forward by John Maxwell. Have you heard of it or read it?
I have not. I'm sure that's maybe where my grandmother actually got the idea from, because she, like I said, she said that to me last week, but that's maybe where she got the saying from.
One of the best books written on the subject. It's actually titled on the concept itself. It's I mean, a well-known preacher, but also motivational speaker. He's very succinct and powerful in his communication. So if you can get your hand on the book, or I think the audio, because he's also spoken about it live many times. There are other self-development material that allude to the same thing, but that's probably the top of mind book that I'd recommend. Whatever you end up getting your hands on, it's the process of failing for what matters most. So each time that you find yourself at a low point, or psychologically, or even in terms of performance, as much as possible, focus on lessons learned and action steps that you can take. I do this on a weekly basis in general life practices, but also trading, and it really develops a kind of a proactive initiative or best practice for doing this work. And then it just becomes an autopilot thing, as opposed to getting that external positive influence and knowing it's right, but then finding it challenging to doing it. The more times you practice it, the better you get at doing it, as with all things.
Yeah, understood.
Okay, great. Mohammed, how about yourself? Key insights or related questions?
So it was very interesting. Yes, the key insight for me is that it's about the learning from the failure. So every time you fail, you should learn. You should learn from the failure. So in order to improve for example, the trades next time, but also in life, like for example, if you fail in business, and you should learn from the failure and do not reproduce the same mistakes next time.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about failure here, because it's the one thing that people don't like to talk about or experience, but it's also failures and successes. So any of you that have had some good trades, include the best and the worst, because you still need to build on that strength, and improve on the weaknesses. So I would definitely include both. And sometimes we make the mistake to focus on one, not the other, and just recognize it's part of the trading cycle and the trade psychology experience. And yes, as Jaden was saying, you also need a big enough sample of trades in order to average them out, and to get a meaningful read on what's happening. So if you're starting out and you're punching out a few trades and the trend is not clear, that also means that you just need to do more of the same. Make sure that you put a viable strategy to start off with, but then if you think that you do, and there's whatever other challenges happening, market environment, or maybe your own mindset, keep on with the trades that make sense, and evaluate yourself on more of a strategic timeline, so you're not constantly being critical of yourself and thinking that you're losing or you're failing, so that you can be a bit more constructive about the process and the performance.
Yeah, thank you, Ron.
Welcome. And then our new student, I'm gonna ask you how best to pronounce your name.
Hi, yeah, you can call me Tua. Sorry, I missed your last class, I think last week. Yeah, because okay. I couldn't follow up with the webinars messages. I'm sorry. Yeah. Then yeah, I'm sorry.
Did you get?
Yes, I watched the last video. Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, I'm still trying to learn how to control my emotion and develop a consistent plan. But yeah, I think I have a problem with the consistency of my strategy. Okay. So yeah, I was wondering if what can I do to keep my consistency and how to follow strictly with my plan. And yeah, I'm not even sure what which plan is the best one. So I'm still like building on my own. So yeah. Just have
Yeah.
to do that.
Finding your way at the start is very natural. And I would have an open mind to that process, just because early on staging, early on learning is exactly that. It's you being patient, pacing yourself, and doing the work is key. But ultimately, as you do that, um, it's confidence will build, and you will see, moments of good performance, or maybe you might have a few winning streaks. But anything that gives you that confidence in terms of performance is great. But I would say also make sure that you're following the process that makes sense, because often performance will be up and down, it'll ebb and flow. So it's important just to make sure that you feel confident that you're staying on track.
Yeah.
And in terms of the process, as whatever process you develop for yourself, make sure that it's clearly defined, rule and evidence based, so that if you're experiencing that emotional experience, which is fine, by the way, it means you're human, and means that you have probably an edge as a trader with the emotions, with the psychology, with the intuition, that can often be a useful thing. What matters is not controlling that. What matters is making sure that you have a systematic process that you can follow in a disciplined way. And if and when you experience the emotions, you can manage and optimize them in the way that is best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really helpful.
I hope so. And again, easier said than done. So I'm saying this to you, and you guys have to do it for yourselves. But do know that, I do it for myself as a trader, and I coach many others to do the same. You will learn by doing. And that's why when you also, continue to learn, but also switch from paper trading to live trading, that's when the experience becomes a lot more immersive. And yeah, just pace yourself, be patient, follow the process, because ultimately, if you just do that, it'll build up that confidence and build up that consistency.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Always remember, good things take time as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been trying to make many trades that I can, so I can learn a little bit, learn of experience from it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and if you minimize the risk, then you can learn more without being too worried about how much you're risking. And that way you can also build enough of a trading track or sample of trades, so that you can understand more from the process, and not get too much of an emotional reaction on whether you're making or losing money. Eventually, obviously, you want to improve your performance, but that's at a certain stage when you know that you're ready. Okay, great. So I'll wrap on that. Happy trading, everyone. See you next week on Tuesday, where we will start the cycle of sessions again, focusing on nature nurture. Are successful traders born with skill, or can they be trained? There will be practical exercises in that session in the second half, so do be prepared to do some work, and please make sure that you can make it. It'll be at the original time of 10 o'clock UK time, so just a slight change this week. So I hope to see you then, next Tuesday, original time.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
All the best. Happy trading.
Yeah. Bye.